Welcome to the Deep Future AI edition from the Parallax IDW Extravaganza. My name is Tom Amarque and with me is my co-host Andrew Sweeney. Also here are Swedish Philosopher Alexander Bard, Jim Rutt, the former chairman of the Santa Fe Institute, the co-initiator of the Game B community and host of the popular podcast The Jim Rutt Show, American philosopher and musician Alex Ebert, and Thomas Hamelryck, a specialist in Bayesian modeling and probabilistic machine learning. So, to start off this conversation, Tristan Harris said in a recent video that 50% of all AI researchers believe that there's a 10% chance that humans go extinct because of their inability to control AI. Sam Altman, CEO of OpenAI, Demis Hassabis, head of Google DeepMind, as well as AI scientist Geoffrey Hinton and hundreds of other scientists just warned in an open letter that it should be globally prioritized to reduce the risk of extinction from AI. So the question I want to pose here in this talk is what our relationship to AI should be. Should we be worried, cautious, or adventurous? Is it all threat or possibility? So, Alexander, after the initial hype has settled, should we be worried?
Well, to begin with, these manifestos you read are absolute bullshit because they're written out of strict self-interest by powerful men who want to own this. And they want to own it in the sense that they want to have it like an oligopoly. They know monopoly is not good for anybody. They want an oligopoly, but they also want to have high thresholds for anybody else to step into the picture. I noticed here that none of the guys who referred to signed these documents are involved in the decentralization movement and are working with decentralized AI, with open source AI. And I think that's actually the really interesting shit is happening at the moment. Funnily enough, it's the most evil of the evil companies, Facebook or Meta, that have distributed their code because they're so desperate. So distributed their code and made it open source, which could be Zuckerberg's saving grace, right? It could be the Bill Gates moment, but Bill Gates actually spoke with Melinda and said, I'm going to start the foundation. Evil's going to go good, right? It could be that moment for Zuckerberg to hope for. But all these guys are establishment guys speaking only out of self-interest. And they want to create a massive drama. And then they want to earn from that drama. There's nothing else going on here. AI has been going on for a long time. It's been building gradually over, in leaps and bounds, building gradually over decades. I'm glad, though, that the current hype has created AI awareness. And I think that's exactly what we guys, who've all been involved in this for years, are now sitting down and having this mature and more advanced conversation about the relationship between AI and human beings. But I want to start from there. I want to hear what the other guys in these conversations have to say today. Forget about those documents. They're meaningless. Let's skip those and start right at where we're at in our understanding of AI and AI's relationship to human beings. So let's start there.
Sure. What's your take on this?
Okay, well, it's one of those conversations where you get 40 minutes before the other guys have their go.
Right.
Okay, my take on this, I'm going to wave a book just for once, a book that, by the way, was translated to German by a certain Tom Amarque, so there we go. This book was published 10 years ago as the first of the 3 books in the grand narratology that I'm writing with John Söderqvist. The last third part comes out in August called Process and Event. Digital Libido was the second part in between, but this came out 10 years ago. Look at the subtitle, Creating God in the Internet Age. Right now, that is enough for this book to become a bestseller. It's just flying off the shelves anywhere you find it. Although that wasn't even prophetic at the time, but it's looked as prophetic now, 10 years later. I firmly think that we are finally creating something called intelligence, and intelligence has never existed before. Intelligence will finally happen. But there's a certain kind of intelligence that will happen. The most frustrating misunderstanding, even with the tech guys that I'm working with, I'm a mentor for loads of tech guys that are working with AI at the moment. We have dinner conversations, we sit down together, we go through what this is. The most frustrating mistake they're making is that they're only understanding intelligence as a logical operation, as if that was all intelligence was. We call this logos in our work. No. There are 3 major meta-narratives the human beings tell about themselves. The other ones are called mythos and pathos. And mythos is actually the one that unites the logos and the pathos. Andrew, if you're gonna wave papers around, maybe you should have silence mode.
Pardon
Okay,
me.
just for that. The problem is that there's emotional intelligence, and there's nothing emotional at all about an AI, and there won't be for a long, long time, because we haven't even started to figure out what the biotechnological AI would look like. This is strictly technological AI. This is the strictly technological intelligence, meaning strictly logical operations. And even within mathematics itself, there's a difference here, because even in mathematics itself, there's the square and the circle, and there's the digital and the analog. And I'm sure Ebert would agree with me here that you know that if you play somebody's CD record and then you put a filter on the CD record and the sound quality gets slightly worse, people will like it more because it would sound like it's more analog. So you put negation into systems and they sound more humane. So that's important to keep in mind here when we go through this. But so far, what we're doing is strictly logical operation of massive amounts of zeros and ones. All we've done is that we increased the amount of zeros and ones we put through the system, which increased the amount of data dramatically, and put even more energy and more electricity to it. And then suddenly things start to happen when reflection is put into the picture as well. That's essentially the sort of large language models and things we have today. I'm sure Thomas can fill me in on lots of other stuff that's happening in AI that I'm not even aware of. But what we know from the AI we currently have, it's strictly logos operation. That means there's also no mythos, because mythos is always the unity of the logos and the pathos. I'll give you a perfect example. I was over at Universal Music last week. I was sitting down at the office of the music company. Somebody came through the door with the typical AI experience at the moment and played a Beatles song that wasn't a Beatles song. And it sounded exactly like Paul and John singing, George playing the guitar, Ringo playing lousy drums. It sounded like the Beatles. And then everybody's just like, yeah, it sounds like the Beatles. And I'm just like, well, doesn't it sound like the Beatles in a retirement home, incredibly demented, being 95 years old? Yeah, spot on. That's what's up. Yeah, it's crap. It's not the Beatles. You can even now hear. It's kind of eerie at first, then you get used to it, then you just realize, yeah, it's just the means. It's all the means added together into a sort of mediocre version of the historical past. And a mediocre version of the historical past is what current AI at least can do, and does massively. It does nothing else. It has no blood. It has no feelings. It's none of those things. It's not even analog. It's dialogue. It's discrete. And that, I think, is a good starting point. Meaning also, we should point out that we don't even know how far logical intelligence can take us, because we have such little of it as human beings. So the fantastic capacity of logical intelligence will finally happen historically. That's part of God coming, but it's only one God coming here, and that's exactly the logical operation being perfected.
I would like to hear what Thomas has to say to all these things.
Yeah, so to get back on this famous letter, right? So I agree with Alexander that we have to be a bit skeptical there. Because these all these cautionary tales, they also serve to protect the interest of people who already have developed a lot of technology, and a lot of regulation will be very interesting to keep newcomers out of the pool, right? That's one thing. The second thing is that these researchers are also looking to protect themselves against accusations when these models will be used for let's say evil purposes. So I think that these are two of the aspects that you can find behind these letters. What I think is that people are very much anthropomorphizing this AI, also because it's a language model. ChatGPT is now in the limelight. It's not the first really revolutionary AI model. So we had AlphaFold before, which solved the protein folding problem. But ChatGPT is, of course, much more accessible to people, because you can talk to it and it looks like it actually can think, right? But if you really understand how it works, it's an incredibly primitive thing in a sense. It's just basically a statistical model that can generate language based on patterns it has seen before. So it's a very simple inductive model that is trained on huge amounts of data and that can remember an enormous amount of patterns. So you can think of it as a huge parrot that has listened to millions of conversations and very good at repeating things or making noises without having the faintest clue of what these noises actually mean. And that's the state of the art that we have with respect to these large language models today. So I don't think there's a big danger that these language models will develop pathos or an internal will to destroy mankind. I think that the big danger lies in people using these language models to do smart things. And I think that the first test will be next year's elections in the US. There we will see what various groups can do with these large language models. I think that's where the real concern lies, not so much in Skynet like taking over of the world by cyborgs.
Are we anywhere close to creating some autonomous kind of entities?
Well, we need a lot of things on top of that. So basically, we need not only induction, which is learning patterns from large amounts of data, but we also need deduction, so logical reasoning, and then we also need something called abduction. So that's a name that comes from the philosopher Peirce, Charles Sanders Peirce. And that means reasoning to a plausible explanation of what is going on. And so deduction and abduction, that's currently completely absent of these large language models. But there are, of course, researchers that are trying to go beyond these simple inductive models and that want to bring in deduction and abduction. And so you have the work of Carl Friston at University College London, which is his active inference. Jan LeCun has also, he's the head of Facebook AI. So he has also worked on various architectures that go beyond the current models. So there's definitely a lot of things happening. But these large language models, even Sam Altman, so the head of OpenAI, has said that these large language models are dead. Because so they're already very, very big, and it seems that they're already hitting the limit of their performance. So making them even bigger will not provide a lot of bang for the buck. So you don't have a lot of return on investment. So even the insiders, so even the people who are working with these large language models, they seem to think that we need a new direction in this type of research.
I would add that the large language models we currently have are a dead end. And the people who work with, they know it's a dead end. So you can take them so far, but you can't take them beyond that point. And this is what Thomas means when he talks about deduction and induction, that these are impossible to create currently. I would even argue that looking into deduction, induction seriously is very similar to the narratology that I talked about in the past. It's just like logical operations can only take you that far, but they can take you into the pathos, and therefore they cannot take you to the mythos, because pathos and mythos are matching deduction and abduction and induction when you speak Peirce's language here. It's just that logical reasoning with Peirce is another way of talking about the three different types of intelligence we're using here. So there has to be human somewhere in the operation. I was just looking at a model the other day for running a future, say, 2035 unicorn worth over $1 billion with only one employee. It's a really interesting thought experiment, but there's still one employee. And we couldn't remove the employee. There were just too many things that collapsed in any model we could look at the moment without an employee. So I'm totally with Thomas. The danger here still lies with human beings and human beings using these tools in new perverted ways, and then we already know the social media changed the social landscape entirely. We found out that the last 3 elections in the US were deeply manipulated by social media and different technologies. And I agree. I think the test is next year's election in America. I think also some of these guys like OpenAI probably just make a cutoff a few months before the election and then not add any data at all, because they don't want their tools to be used by anybody who's deeply involved in the election campaign. Because anybody's got an AI out accessible that still milks data into the system in the middle of the election campaign is certainly going to be used by these powers who want to manipulate us. Another little thing I want to add to this, though, before we pass on, is to think that precisely because logical intelligence has finally arrived historically, and it's probably never really existed, rarely, sometimes, human beings, with the help of mathematics, with the help of written language, which is mathematics, we can actually figure out logically intelligent operations to ourselves. And we perfected them with computers. We made them infinitely better with computers. And now we just add the internet and we turn the world into one giant computer. And suddenly we add what we call AI on top of that. And that means logical intelligence will finally happen. We don't even know what logical intelligence looks like because we've only had a taste of it, which is our own tiny little logical intelligence. What we do know from, for example, the CD digital versus analog record experiments in the 1990s, is that we do know that logical operations can mimic, and they can mimic, and they can mimic. And they mimic all the way until we believe they're doing more than logos. Would they mimic all the way till we believe that they're pathos, and then we perceive them as being mythical? And I think that's a discussion we should have, especially with Ebert here. We have an artist in the group as well. Is that where that could take us? Because what the mimicking reveals, though, is that human beings are not intelligent. We're mimetic. We're mimetic beings. We mimic each other all the time. And we mistake our mimicry for being intelligence. So in that sense, logical intelligence here will take mimicry till perfection. And that's kind of shocking for human beings. I think one of the revelations here is that consciousness hardly ever existed. We're talking about consciousness, it hardly ever existed. Intelligence hardly ever existed. Many of these human attributes we're throwing at the AI are actually attributes we never had. And that I find interesting.
Jim, I was thinking about unintended consequences, so.
Before I hop into that, let me sort of kind of respond to Alexander in particular and Thomas a little bit. So I want to bump up a level. And I think it's extraordinarily important that when we start thinking about AI, we don't fall into LLMs or even deep learning uber alles, right? It is only one technique. And I've been following this area relatively closely for 10 years now and was involved in niche ways before that. And as Alexander said, and Thomas reinforced, probably deep learning and certainly LLMs are not the golden road to artificial general intelligence, human level or beyond, that super mind that all of us that got involved in computers had in mind when we were 13, right? These things are probably not by themselves the road there, that there are some larger system concepts that involve orchestration of multiple kinds of intelligence and the cognitive synergy that arises from that orchestration. A project I've helped out with from time to time called OpenCog is an early precursor of what such a system might look like. So I think that's really important because so many people now say AI, they think LLMs, and LLMs are merely a subset of deep learning, which is only a subset of artificial intelligence. And so when you hear somebody talking about AI, stop and think about which of those three levels they're talking about. And of course, there's the distinction between narrow AI, which LLMs are an example of, and AGI, artificial general intelligence, which is human level or beyond, that can do anything a human can do, but better, essentially, is the theory. So then, if we think about unintended consequences or intended consequences, but risks, you have to think about these various levels while you're doing that. The one everybody comes to mind is become the cliche is the Yudkowskian AGI paperclip maximizer. And I know enough about cognitive science to say that actually is a risk, but it's out of ways. It's not a risk that's going to come from the current state of AI. And I'm glad people like Yudkowsky and others are studying those risks. But much more to the point are bad people doing bad things with narrow AI. So, consider the use of facial recognition in China. They can tell a Uyghur from a Han, right? And they use that, right, to build a state-of-the-art state that Stalin would be highly envious of. And then in terms of unintended consequences, I think this is already happening in a small way and probably accelerate. Something like LLMs are actually really good at solving and automating, partially at least, a lot of bullshit jobs in the Graeber vernacular, shuffling paper in corporations, doing customer service, things of that sort. And so we are going to see significant economic and employment dislocation and changes for both good and bad. And there will be winners and losers. The people who adopt these technologies will become 2, 3, 4x, not 100, 2 to 4x more productive. And programmers, nobody will hire a programmer that doesn't know how to use GPT in their workflow right now, which is basically 2.5 months after GPT-4 came out. And that will just accelerate. With respect to these ideas of the election, I would put that in a broader class that includes a number of things, which I might call information nihilism. Or information anarchy, or information nihilism / anarchy, that includes things like the fact that LLMs were not designed to be search engines, so they hallucinate like crazy. I'm actually a wonderful test case because the LLMs generally know the name Jim Rutt and know a little bit about me, but they don't know much. If you ask about George Washington or Adolf Hitler or Napoleon, they usually get it right. Ask about Jim Rutt, and it'll be a mix of fact and fiction, and it's a very good test. The worse the LLM, the higher level of fiction, and etc. Probably Bard fits in that category. I'm sure it knows about Bard, but I'm sure it hallucinates pretty radically about Bard also. So that's one form. The other is I'm now calling the sea of sludge, right? When you get to know how to use these LLMs, you can produce output like crazy that's superficially good, right, compared to the average syntactical and semantic quality of what you see on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. This is as good or better. You can make it stylistically clever with some tricks, etc. And we're already seeing a massive increase of that. And I know for a fact that at least the DeSantis campaign is spending money to do things like provide a portal for their members to be able to create Facebook posts that sound like them and yet deliver the DeSantis party line, and I'm sure everybody else will do it because it's easy to do. And then, of course, in this area of nihilism, already we're starting to sense that we will soon be unsure whether the people we're dealing with are real or an artifact. And I've proposed a business kind of taken off of the fair witness idea in Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. That you could hire people from what's essentially a cult to physically go to a location and certify that this is actually happening. People who are incorruptible, and it'll be expensive. It cost me $500 to send this cultist of the Fair Witness Guild to go see Bard play music on a stage somewhere. Yep. I'm here. It's real. Ain't bullshit, right? I think there may be a demand for that to fight that. Now, next one. This is a deeper one. I got this idea from Forrest Landry, by the way, which is he's a little bit skeptical about AGI happening anytime soon, and he says it doesn't matter for this one, and that is that humans will gradually cede responsibility to the AIs as they can do better than humans can, or at the intersection of better and cheaper. And in the same way, kids today, God damn it, most of them can't do multiplication in their head anymore, and most of them can't read a map. If you take that and generalize it to much of human cognitive work, we can get to a pretty scary place. Then the Rutt corollary to that is, now imagine a giant solar flare that wipes out all of our technology, right? Which could happen, or an EMP war. Then what happens when humans have forgotten how to do almost everything, including cook and clean their houses, right? In a few generations. The film Idiocracy gives us a sense of it. And then the sixth one, I think I actually coined this one in conjunction with Daniel Schmachtenberger, and that is that all the various narrow AIs as an ensemble will accelerate game A. Right? If we believe that game A, i.e. the status quo, is headed over the cliff because it does not know how to behave within planetary limits, and it does not know how to optimize for human well-being rather than quantities of money circulating in a loop, these things will make all that go faster. So it means we have less time than we thought to deal with it. So that was kind of a long answer to a short question, but I would say that's my take on the unanticipated and anticipated risks, and thinking in more generally about AI as a phenomena and not just LLMs and deep learning.
Right. Alex,
I could just add a thing,
sure.
an aspect of it, by giving us examples from the social media of the 2010s, and we know where that got us, and how this is just going to get worse. We have an explosion in Sweden, where I live, in psychiatric disease among teenage girls. It has gone through the roof. A recent survey showed that 70%, 7 out of 10 teenage girls in Sweden, consider herself to be psychiatrically sick, right? Sick, not depressed, sick, right? And we tried to find the single most shared cause. And it turns out that TikTok tweaked their algorithm a couple of years ago so that every damn picture you post on TikTok of yourself is automatically 10% improved in terms of traditional beauty standards. What the girls didn't know was that nobody told them. So they're living in a world of pictures of themselves and of their girlfriends where they're all 10% improved according to classic aesthetic standards. Nobody told them. And they've gone absolutely bananas. And this is exactly what I mean. When the capitalist forces, here's where I agree with Jim, and I think actually his last example with him and Schmachtenberger, number 6, is the really interesting one here. What he calls the game A infusion from old institutions, because that's where everything is programmed. Everything with AI works with historical past. It works with recycling historical past. It has a really Hindu quality about it. It's nothing but eternal return of the same. So here's the problem. If somebody tweaks that standard, takes classical beauty, which is easy to spot, because you have classical beauty all over historical facts, like people aspire towards it. You take the aspirational standards, throw it onto the face of a regular teenage girl with acne and everything on it and a few kilos extra. And then she gets an improved picture of herself. If she likes it, sends it off. If she doesn't realize that the machine does that with all the girls, they'll freak out. And here's I think the best alarmist one-liner so far in the AI hype has been Jaron Lernier's statement when he says that AI is not going to make us go extinct. AI will make us go mad. I think that's the great risk we're talking about. And I think that's pretty much rhymes with what Jim just said.
Alex, what's your take on this? I have to say, there is a saying, evil is the annunciation of the next level of order. You know, the things that on one moment seem strange and kind of unstructured noises kind of define, what the future will be. So, and I think, Alex, we talked about this, about signal and noise in another podcast. So what's your take on this?
Y'all can hear me, right? Because I can't hear myself. Yeah? Now? Okay. There's a lot of shit that's been covered. Just hitting on the semantic flooding that we're sort of, that Jim just referred to as informational nihilism, sort of a Circavian, ramp up of, I don't know. It's its own version of God damn it, what's the propaganda? Is the sort of the informational nihilism where we simply cannot trust the ground, and and having facility to prove tangible origins, I think may be a thing for sure. Where, as Jim mentioned, we can sort of develop techniques to prove the tangibility and reality of things, but there's also a beauty, I think, to semantic flooding and a repotentiation. And this gets into metaphysics and phenomenology, and ritual time, if I may borrow a term from Thomas. But I think it's okay. I do think that we do risk an epidemic of like human vegetation, where we're outsourcing so much. And something that I see that's happening now, just to add to this list of, of negative qualities. We all understand, by the way, I think the context should always be set in these conversations that AI is going to happen. It's not like the people that are raising the alarms are arguing and suddenly the context is, should we do AI or should we not? Is AI good or bad? It's happening. It's inevitable. The alarm bells are being raised to potentially place guardrails. One thing I want to say regarding the guardrails that hasn't been brought up is that really what the guardrails from the LLCs, OpenAI and others, are definitely guardrails that they're attempting to raise in order to legislate against open source developments. That's really what it's about. It's not simply about raising the alarm bells to get excited and then pour money into it, but really to legislate against the open source because they know open source is going to eat their lunch. I think that's even the words that they used in that internal Google memo. But one thing that I just wanted to bring up, the phenomenology, like you asked, what does AI reveal about us? A very Heideggerian question. And I think that one of the things it reveals is our proclivity to and we do this with nature in a Rousseauian sort of sense, where it's like, well, the tree and the rhizome and the animal, they know their sort of natural instincts. They know the correct decisions, and so we sort of almost offload our own ethics to the ethics of animals, even though the ethics of animals terrorize us because they're so brutal and honest. And then we look at, and we've already done these experiments with offloading our ethical decisions to machines with regard to sort of, resource allocation or cutting jobs or even, killing people, in abstract terms. And they find that we much prefer to outsource our ethical decision making to these machines because twofold. Number one, the victims of those choices, the people that get fired, the people that potentially are, allocated to be killed, or their resources are reallocated from them to other people. For instance, a Tetris study just came out, I think, today, and it was showing that an AI was assigning randomly, two people are playing Tetris at the same time and randomly assigning one person more of the Tetris decisions than the other. And then they measured the emotional sort of like the perception of one player versus the other. And the players that were getting allocated less Tetris plays were perceived to be essentially less intelligent by the other player. Meaning we assign a sort of objectivity to the machine that feels more rooted in fact and in reality than decisions coming from humans. And likewise, the flip side of that, so we assign this objectivity, so we outsource our ethical decisions by assigning this objectivity, and that's happening now. That's a phenomenological question. It's not a question of the back end or what's actually happening or the black box or any of the information. And then twofold, the victims of those resource allocations are less inclined to blame anyone for their fate. So we have this twofold sort of outsourcing of ethical decision making that I think is going to really ramp up. It's already ramping up. I mean, in terms of like how much rent should we charge? All of these otherwise previously somewhat ethical decisions with regard to, displacement of minority groups and all that sort of thing in the housing market. All those are being reallocated to AI, and they're now making these decisions for us on our behalf. And thereby we have no one to blame, and we can sort of be like, yeah, but it's the objective decision. So that is one thing. And then just to double tap on the semantic flooding and the informational nihilism as potentially a good thing, a repotentiation of meaning. This is where, I think I would probably end up disagreeing with almost everyone on here except for Bard maybe, that these moments of semantic flooding, we experience them in our lives. Right? Like you say baseball, 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 and they usually call it semantic satiation, but what it really is semantic saturation, to the point where, or the mantra, you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it, you repeat it, you saturate the semantic space, and suddenly everything goes absent, and there's a repotentiation. And I think we're really in need of that. And I think that if there's anything if there's any silver lining to the flood of semantic saturation happening right now, for instance, there's an AI song software that I've been playing with that has already created over 5% of the history of the world's history of songs in just a couple months. So there's a saturation of shit music, but all of this sort of like the news and all that bombardment, I think that at a certain point, that loss of meaning is a positive because it essentially becomes negative space, the new backdrop against which we can make meaning and draw out meaning again. I'll stop there.
Maybe I have a question for everybody as well, because I was talking to OG Rose about all this stuff, and he was talking about AI in terms of his kids, and he was talking about intrinsic and extrinsic motivation. And so the fear is that it's going to just take away all our intrinsic motivation and we become sort of robots, etc. But on the other hand, it could just swallow up, I'm thinking it could just swallow up the bureaucracy and a lot of the bullshit jobs and allow people now some space for intrinsic motivation. So that would be another another positive potentiality after all the saturation, after the hypersaturation. And, I already have students who are creating PowerPoint presentations in 1 minute and trying to fake them, and it's too easy and it's too fake. And so now I'm picking up pen and paper again, just because I feel like doing something different than the ordinary mode of writing. So anyway, that's a bit of a ramble, but what is it going to steal everybody's motivation, or is it going to create a space, as Ebert's saying, for saturation where we have new motivations?
No, saturation will happen. I think Ebert's point is this one. If you look at the printing press, Germany, 1450, people were still hiring other people to read loudly from books for another 100 years. Around 1550, people figured out that you could actually ask somebody to read more quietly and then actually read yourself. And you didn't have anybody to hire any longer who read the book to you. And the entire job market for people who read books was gone, right? Monks and nuns were gone, basically, because they had written books in the past. But by the early 1700s, every damn concubine in Europe, and there are a lot of them, the kings are fucking a lot of women, right? They're just queuing up in front of the nightclubs or the whorehouses by the courts and fucking kings. Every damn concubine was written a diary, and every diary was published as if it was a sensation, like influencers are today, for example, in social media. Finally, there were so many concubine diaries around being absolutely the same shit, every one of them. Oh, we all knew the size of the king's cock by now. So it forced us to develop the book publishing industry. And the book publishing industry is simply a negation of this flood of information where there's no order to its chaos. And it's just bland and boring and horrible. And finally, somebody's got to pick up all these different scripts from these concubines and others and sit down and read them one by one and get paid to do it, and then publish books with a stamp on them that is a book publishing company with its authority. And eventually, of course, record companies did the same thing for music, etc. So the same thing is happening here. The principle is called curatorship. And already I would say today that among the kids, if you use Midjourney, for example, to illustrate a text, you print 5 different Midjourney pictures, and then you pick which one of those illustrations is better than the other 4. And this becomes a form of symbiotic intelligence rather than AI. But here, it's not the production in itself, the raw production itself, because the AI is your assistant. Rather, it's the curatorship that becomes the art. And we have moved a long time ago over to curatorship being the art, because curatorship is much more valuable than raw production. This is what's going to happen now as well. It's already happening massively with the internet, and as we have search, and of course, ChatGPT made search a lot better. It's, so that's already happening. But I think it's really, really good to go back to the concubine diary experience from the 1700s to see how human beings actually react to something like this. Everybody thinks a new medium is for them. Everybody with any desire to be famous or successful think, oh, this is my chance. Somebody invented guitar. I'm going to be the world's best guitar player. No, you just become one among millions of mediocre guitar players. That's what happens constantly throughout history. Same thing here. Therefore, the enormous disappointment, we fostered our kids narcissistically to think they're a fucking star, and they're not. And when they fall down through the floor, realizing they're not a star, off they go to psychiatric care units because we fooled them into believing something that would never happen. This is what human beings are doing right now. And of course, everybody's jumping on the AI bandwagon, pretending, doing proto or fake AI companies with AI, whatever. They're going to do something on AI, and most of it's going to be rubbish all over again. In this way, human beings repeat the same mistake constantly because we're mimetic, we're not intelligent.
Go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, I think there's 2 points there, separate and important points that Alexander made. One is, and Andrew actually teed up in his question, is I do think that the good things that could come from AIs, if we manage them correctly, is this great increase in productivity and quality of stuff. Whenever you're on the phone I recently had a problem with my credit card. You're talking to morons about complicated things is not pleasant. I was saying GPT-4 could have done a much better job than the morons I was dealing with if it was wired up with the right affordances. It literally could have done a lot better job. And that's going to happen pervasively throughout. And that will allow us to reduce the number of bullshit jobs very considerably, right? Graeber estimated it was a third of jobs. I suspect it may be more like 2/3 eventually. And at which point we have a huge problem. In game A, most people have been trained that their life is their job, right? That their status is their job and their meaning is their job. And, think how crazy it was that feminism was about women leaving their families to go get a bullshit job someplace. And they felt liberated by that, which they did. Right. So what we need to do is another change, another turn where what is it are humans for when the problem of want has significantly been solved? At least that if we wanted to have, let's say, a Portugal level quality of life for everybody on Earth, call that a 4,000 watt society. Compare that to the United States at about 11,000 watts and Botswana at 500 watts. What is it that our humans are for when we no longer need to spend most of our time making and shuffling and bullshitting? And I think that is the big question of the hour. And that this earlier than expected breakthrough on a technology which isn't AGI, but is good enough to automate a lot of bullshit jobs, should cause us to confront what are we about on the other side of this. Is it true that everybody has a great artist inside waiting to come out? I doubt it, right? Sturgeon's law is still going to be true. 90% of everything is shit. And we may have to stop thinking about the fact that we have to be the best at X, the fact that we are good at X and enjoy doing X. A mediocre banjo player with a mediocre voice can still entertain their friends on the porch. So it may actually be, hopefully, at least the game B ethos is to return to the mesoscale of 150 adults plus or minus, factor or two up or down, where people can interact face to face and get satisfaction from enactment with their peers, with their fellow human beings, and can resonate with the primate essence of themselves. To be the songwriter that is the Taylor Swift. I mean, that's kind of a crazy ass shit thing, right? Probably the AIs will do that better than Taylor Swift ever did it. But to be, as good as the best bluegrass fiddle player in the mountainous valley I live in, that's still something people could ascribe to, and lots of people could have roles of that sort. And that's at least one trajectory for what are humans for on the other side of the struggle for want, when that becomes solved. And I would say that is one of the highest things for all of us to be thinking about. What's on the other side for humans?
Oh, you're way too naive, James. Not going to work.
Yeah, I was gonna.
hey,
can I hop in on that?
You go first, Alex. You go first.
Just briefly.
Let's slaughter Jim. Let's slaughter Jim.
Yeah, let's slaughter this beautiful pig. I want to feel the way that Jim just described. I want to believe, for instance, and have in my past, that humans are intrinsically attuned to the odd failures and the cracks, and we love the fissures and the humanness, and that we'll never be able to reproduce those qualities. And we have this nose for discovery that will always point us back toward the sort of Dunbar's cap experience, and that will always reemerge as these sort of new floods occur. But if that were true, then my parents would not watch Indiana Jones and the Temple of Doom with the fucking HD sports setting on. Okay? Humans do not understand and cannot even detect shitty art. When I actually looked on YouTube to check out, I don't know if you're even aware of this, maybe you guys are some of these terrible people who can't tell the difference between the soap opera effect, which is when a TV is designed to spit out like 1,000 frames per second. And so when you watch something shot at 24 frames per second, it interpolates like 500 frames in between each frame and makes everything look like a fucking soap opera. They call it the soap opera effect. I went on YouTube, I saw a side-by-side comparison, and all of these filmmakers are really upset about it, and they're like, we got to get this back. And if you look at the side-by-side comparison and look at the comments, 90% of the comments are what? I love the soap opera effect. I love the soap opera effect. It's so cool. It makes you feel like you're there. The thing is that we overestimate the phenomenology of consumption. And I think that we also overestimate our ability to temporally weight qualitative things. Like, yeah, The Godfather was better in our minds, but here I am watching Tom Cruise in Top Gun. This is just as good, because we have this environmental induction which completely absence, all temporal weighting, and we end up just with this really, and this is, by the way, studied. These are facts. There's studies I can actually reference that show that, for instance, music. They analyzed 1 million songs across all genres, and all music is actually becoming more and more homogeneous. Less chordal variety, less harmonics, less frequency, less timbre differential. It's all becoming more homogeneous. Why? Because the algorithm is revealing synaptic shortcuts to our fucking jouissance. It's revealing that what we thought was human depth was actually a scaffolding built by non-optimized, a lack of optimization. All of our depth and all the things, these were slings and arrows that we had shot off because we didn't know. We came up with myths. We came up with philosophies because we were ignorant, and that ignorance provided our human depth. And now that we're algorithmically fucking decoding the human enjoyment, we're seeing that we're actually, depth was a fundamental scaffolding on top of a fundamental shallowness. And and by shallowness, I simply mean a topography that is flat, where we all can be hacked. And I think that we have to keep that in mind. So when we think about where are we headed, what's on the other side of this, we can't forget to also include who are we, what are we, and how do we react to things.
Totally agree with Ebert here. So here's the point, a law. Human beings never improve. Technology improves. That means that anything technology has conquered from human beings is lost forever to humanity. That's just a law, period. Don't ever think there's a way to turn off the technology and go back to pre-technology. That is a ridiculous, nostalgic, shitty dream that's just blatantly untrue. Never happened, will never happen. So whenever technology is taken over something, we have to reinvent ourselves. It's absolutely correct. But it's very, very hard for us to do so because actually we were adjusted to society that was very much looking into human needs. This was the local community. Everybody had a role. You had an archetype. You were trained to follow your archetype. You had a mentor who trained you. Village life, prior to that, tribal life. Then we moved into urban and went from urban to digital and suddenly now live in a global society. No way back. There's no way back. You can just look at a regular family going for a family dinner. They're all sitting with their smartphones in their hand and they're not having a conversation. They're not going to turn off their fucking smartphone. It's never going to happen. Okay?
Yeah, they will.
No, they will not, Jim.
Let me tell you how to do it.
Wait.
Let me tell you how to do it.
No, the real example, Jim. Wait for the real example. We fooled everybody to believe in the 19th century that slavery was evil. We trained everybody to think that slavery was abundant and was gone, and we abandoned it, and we were civilized because we abandoned slavery. All that happened was the fucking guys who wrote the AI manifesto the other week, the same guys in the 19th century, realized that if they only paid us to work 8 hours a day instead of 24 hours a day, they could fool us into believing we were free to do whatever we liked 16 hours a day. We had freedom all of a sudden, and we were only slaves temporarily for 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. They only paid us for those 8 hours, by the way, nothing more. So capitalism went through the roof, made tons of money, fooled us into believing slavery was over and done with. We miss slavery so badly that when people sit down and talk about themselves, 99% of people cannot even mention anything they do during the other 16 hours of the day that is meaningful to them. They always go back to their profession and what they do at best 8 hours a day, and they're terrified of becoming unemployed and not having it chained to reality any longer. That is how human beings operate. And to try to think it's anything else is absolutely inhumane and cruel. A small minority of people that we call shamanoid people in our studies, about 4% of people could not care less because they don't make a difference between work and having fun. Okay? 4%. It's a bit like queer. Queer exists. The queer spectrum is another 4% called LGBT. It's not relevant to the other 96% of the population. Shamanoid personality traits do not exist in the other 96% of the population. To say that the regular Joes and Jills out there should be interested in anything else but going to work is just inhumane, cruel nonsense. That's what I meant.
It's not historically accurate, right? It is a resonance with our current culture and economic system. But if we look at the history of humans going back 300,000 years, no matter how liberal you want to apply this kind of horror show to, no more than the last 10,000, and in its strong form, not really only since 1870. I think you fail to see how we are scaffolded by our cultural creations, which are subject to change. These are things that were created by humans, and they can be changed by humans. And if you look at anthropology and the history of how humans have lived, there's a vast variety of ways people can relate to work. Forgers didn't define themselves in terms of their occupation, nor did they work even 8 hours a day. They may have worked 2 hours a day and not every day. So I think this is very, very common for people to not see the institutional structures that are holding us in our box. And I call it the gateway drug to game B, is to realize this is just shit that came along, it emerged, it's a frozen accident of history, and like all such frozen accidents, it's changeable.
Listen, work is the wrong word here. Purpose and meaning is the right word. You're saying that purpose and meaning is derived historically for human beings from somewhere outside of work. I say that's complete bullshit. There's no historical facts behind it. It's anarchism. It's bad anarchism, Jim. So let's go back to people. Purpose and meaning are the words. People go, especially men, go absolutely crazy with that purpose and meaning. So do women if they're not part of a reproductive process. That's just how biology works within human beings. It even works that way within transsexuals and shaman people too. If you're not part of a meaning-making system where you have a role, an archetype within the archetypes in a tribal context, you go crazy. That's what we mean with people going mad.
Well, I agree. I don't think we disagree about that. Yeah, it doesn't have to be work. It doesn't have to be industrialized. It doesn't have to be soul crushing.
Jim, for you, it doesn't have to be work. But don't be so megalomaniac you think you're the standard for humanity. For the vast majority of people who are not shaman, Jim, for them, this is total rubbish, what you're saying. It's
right
not
now, within the current social context, that is true. They've been programmed that way, right? But
we'll see. But
it's possible to have humans that are...
This is precisely why I'm not an anarchist, because I don't think anarchism is relevant to humanity as a whole.
Well, but let's just imagine for a second, just taking Jim's point for a second. Let's just imagine that that all productivity is taken over by AI, and we're left to be these sort of fucking monks enjoying life and enjoying family. What we actually are economically are just the consumption class. We're pure consumers, and then we think about, okay, what would our life be like consuming these optimized nuggets of product? Because they're each now optimized for our particular jouissance. They have our synaptic shortcuts dialed in. So what is social life like at that point? And, and then we could start thinking about, what that is, but we have to think of it as a life of consumption, because without consumption, then we're really in fantasy land. But what AI is there to do is to take over the production and drive us into pure consumership. So what is life like?
We talked about that in the Netocrats 23 years ago, me also, because they call it the consumptarian underclass in the digital society. This is exactly the nightmare we're looking at right now, because the vast majority of people are devastated by it. Let's ask Thomas Hamelryck here. Let's go to Gerard. What happens to mimetic desire in a society where you're told you're only here to consume because you're too fucking stupid and too intelligent to do anything more meaningful than consumption? Okay, what happens then with mimetic desire? I would love for Thomas to explore a Girardian view of a society that the vast majority of people are told they can do nothing but consume.
Yeah. So one of the things that will be... So you refer to the book printing and the introduction of book printing, and then the spread of the Bible, the conflict between Protestants and Catholics, the 30-year war. So that's what happens basically when you drastically change the network structure of the world. So you get a time period where you have an enormous amount of turmoil and a lot of people who don't know their position in the world anymore. And that already happened with the rise of internet, of course, because that drastically changed the network structure of our world. And now we have AI, so we have like another revolution on top of that. So it will be very interesting to see how the change in the network structure, and then maybe also the shift to a economy that is maybe more geared towards play than towards consumption. It will be indeed very interesting to see what comes out of that. And what I think that what is needed is to basically understand that all of this technology interacts with a very archaic pattern that is characteristic for humanity, and that is this contrast between prohibition and the sacred, or prohibition and ritual. And what I see in this current age is that there is an enormous confusion between prohibition and between ritual. People don't know anymore whether they are in the ordinary time, and Ebert, you might criticize me for the use of the word time, but so are we in time of prohibition, or are we in time of ritual? So that used to be extremely well regulated. Now we are in time of prohibition. That means no sexuality. That means no intoxication. And then suddenly you are in a ritual time where sexuality is brought in, transgression is brought in, violence, intoxication. And these two time periods, they were very, very well differentiated. And that has completely disappeared from our society, unless you are I don't know, a neo-Orthodox Christian or something like that, who tries to bring that back, that structure of prohibition. So what I think we will see is like an age of enormous confusion. And like the fentanyl epidemic in America is a very good symptom of this confusion between ritual and prohibition time. So if you are an addict like that, so if you use fentanyl all the time, or something even more more exotic or more spectacular, so you are living in this ritual time all of the time, and that leads to great disasters. So there's an interplay of a lot of different things, new types of networks, then also technologies that run on these networks. So we will have deep fakes, we will have conversations that are really created by AI, and they play on our primary emotions, on our mimetic nature, and all of that network structure clashes with our archaic structure. So that'll be an interesting show to watch. And what I do see is that, I agree with Alexander that we should not underestimate the chaos and the turmoil that we are going to face, and there's not going to be an easy solution. But I do also see the point of Jim Rutt, that there are a lot of people who are starting to understand that there is something going on there, that we need to kind of go back to a certain structure that is based on these on how humans are structured internally, anthropologically, that is prohibition and ritual. And there are people who provide prohibitions, all of this men's work and, Wim Hof and what have you, and people who provide rituals. And they are attracting more and more attention and attracting more and more, a larger and larger part of the economy. And I think that is a very interesting evolution.
But what happens to mimetics? What happens to mimetics in a world of pure consumption?
Well, it's going to go through the roof, because the AI will understand how to play exactly into the primary emotions and the mimetic nature of humans to sell whatever the AI wants to sell, or to sell whatever the person behind the AI wants to sell. Because the problem is not the AI itself. The problem is that the AI is a tool that makes things possible for many, let's say, bad actors, or even people who don't know what they're doing. So that these people get an enormous amount of possibilities. So that's where the danger of the AI.
All right, well, let me rephrase that then. Mimetic rivalry. So in the instance where we're literally in a feedback loop of one, where we're just being fed like our own image back to ourselves, what happens to mimetic rivalry?
Well, it goes through the roof, right? And scapegoating goes through the roof. We see that already. So there's, just look at culture, look at the copying, the what Alexander referred to, the phenomenon of TikTok. This is all mimetic desire. Looking at models, looking at the most beautiful one, the richest one, the one that hangs out most on beautiful tropical beaches. So we already have an enormous increase in mimetic desire, and a matching incredible increase in scapegoating. Right now, it's still digital, but at some point, this might flip into, well, if I look at all the riots that were going on in America over a couple of years, so we already see this scapegoating, this mimetic violence seeping out into reality.
I got a couple of things I want to say here.
Can I just add what Thomas said, though, then on to you, John. What the point here is that you think of it as an elite that has a sedated biomass that they need to deal with. They don't want to be the object of the rivalry here. So they will basically, this time around, the elite will be secluded, disappear from view, arrange for mimetic rivalry to be projected onto space, where they will then keep a sedated biomass at the bottom of society to consume. The problem they have is that they don't know when that sedated biomass is awakened all of a sudden, goes into lynch mob mode, start chasing the scapegoat, and that's when they get messy. So that's the overall picture. Okay, on to you, Jim.
Yeah, I think there's, with this august crew, it's hard to say this, but I think you all lack imagination. You are too locked into the current structure, and that there are big alternatives that are within close grasp. My wife, who's a very wise person, she has predicted that 20 years from now, TikTok will be considered to be the equivalent of cigarettes, and to allow a 15-year-old to use TikTok will be considered a gross, or the 20-year from now equivalent would be considered a gross affront to propriety, at least amongst middle-class people. Second, there's an obvious technological...
Well, there are still a lot of smokers, Jim. I mean,
right,
in Denmark, a lot of people smoke here, so I don't know if that's a good analogy.
Amongst college grads in the United States, it's about 8% now, recent college grads, almost gone. And it's on its way out. And
that's just because they're smoking weed instead. They're all smoking weed, Jim. They're just smokers. Yeah.
Some aren't. Okay, the second one, here's an obvious techno move. Again, imagination. What's the adjacent possible? So one that I've been mentoring 3 different projects, and damn it, if I was 45 instead of 70, I'd go do this one myself, and I might still, is that I don't think that most people will allow themselves to be exploited by the platforms for much longer. That there's a very clear move, which is that we each surround ourselves with an info agent, which is powered by the same technologies that create things like ChatGPT and Stable Diffusion and other things, and that we have a mediated exposure to these things, and that further the info agents themselves interconnect so that discernment and curation flows through a meta level of network that's above the lower level networks. And at first it will be an elite product, version 1.0, 0.1 for one group I'm counseling. I've told them aim for 100,000 people, right? 100,000 people that will pay you, $25 or $30 a month for this service. But it will become cheaper and cheaper to provide as the large language models get cheaper, and just Moore's law as it moves ahead. And within 5 to 10 years, that can be a mass product for $2 a month for everybody, where they no longer allow themselves to be exposed to the raw flood of garbage, and only things that come through their semi-permeable membrane, and that will make a gigantic difference, right? I think it's a lack of imagination to imagine that we're going to continue to stick our fingers into the 240-volt outlet, which is Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and TikTok, and things like that. And then a third, there is the ability to build counter cultures, quite literally. In the United States, we have the Mennonites and Amish, for instance, who have chosen to eschew even the telephone and electricity. Some of them, the more extreme versions of it, and I don't think the game B communities will go that far, though some will. I had dinner about 2 months ago with a young guy, just sold his company, made a pile of money. He's building a village, and one of the rules in the village is no electricity in the houses. I think there can be a cultural turn away from all this, and think about how all these things work together. The moral concept that TikTok is worse than cigarettes, information agents, so that when we do have to go out there, we go out in our hazmat suit, essentially, and a potential cultural change, which can be built inside a membrane around the Dunbar number, 2x either direction, that actively eschews this as bad. And that
what a socialist you are, Jim. You're a fucking Stalinist.
No, I'm a communist.
This is all Soviet Union, Jim Rutt.
No, it's all voluntary within the membrane. And when people see how good it is,
you're not going to get those 100,000 guys to join that app at all. You're not even going to get 1,000, Jim. Wake up to reality. This is nonsense.
AI
will be so good at creating symbolic equivalences to physical reality that exactly pulls us into those symbolic worlds and will make us all go virtual. That's exactly what computer games do today. Computer games are already way more exciting than anything you do physically. Way more exciting. And they're going to get more exciting, whereas physical reality is not going to get any more exciting at all. We need to get out of this sort of nostalgic anarchist loop because it's got nothing to do with the vast majority of people who live their lives in the future. And I'm not a moralist at all. I don't mind if the vast majority of people born on this planet become a sedated biomass. I could not care less. I'm Nietzsche, right? I'm with the netocratic elite, but I see the problem here. And if you're going to address the problem, then purpose and meaning is something so profoundly human that you can't play around with purpose and meaning and pretend you can fake it. And if you do fake it, you do it through gaming and you make people addicted to it. And that's going to be the best alternative they have before they go and kill themselves. That's essentially what you're going to have.
I think there is another alternative you guys don't see yet, which is to turn away
Jim,
and to build our rich, high dimensional. That's the other part. Well, it is true that these things are getting higher dimensional. They're still quite flat. Compare looking at Taylor Swift on YouTube to doing what we do relatively regularly in our very, very, very rural place where we go to the county seat, population 150. We go to the cidery where the locally made, really excellent cider is served, and a local pickup bluegrass band plays on Friday nights from 8 till midnight, and there's conversations at the table, people playing cards, there's secret sneaking around romances being arranged. There's all kinds of high dimensional human life going on. And it's the fact that so many of us have not experienced that because we're living in these manufactured money on money return hells. If we can gradually build places where people can have those experiences and we can give them a lens to see what has been done to them in the name of game A, that I am much more, you have a very pessimistic view of human nature. I suppose that's what it comes down to.
No, I do not. I just
Nietzschean,
Jim, I just think you're a rubbish Luddite. I think you're just trying to pull something back we had. We left it for a reason. We left rural for a reason. We were bored with it. So it's not going to be able to compete with the sort of advanced technology we're going to have in the future. This is going to be the easy part for AI to kill this fantasy that physical reality is somehow superior to symbolic reality. That's the easy part for AI to kill.
I think you'd be surprised.
I'm not pessimistic at all. I'm just realistic. I just don't want to do this.
That's what all the
and I think what you described, Jim, is dead boring. I don't want to be part of that Saturday night with a fucking what do you call it? The country
bluegrass band.
Yeah, it sounds boring. I love you, but that sounds boring. I don't want to see you in that state. I thought
next time you come to the stage,
really boring.
We'll take you there.
Bluegrass is where I draw the line. Bluegrass. That's not
Alex.
I'm a big fan of bluegrass,
Alex,
but I
please
have
go
a
ahead.
question.
You want to say something?
Can I just? Okay.
No, Alex wants to say something.
I just want to pop in. I think what Jim is actually talking about is going to happen, but it's going to be reserved for the elites. I like to say that in the future, only the rich will be able to afford nothing. I was once going to, and we already see this with organic, like less fucking shit in the cow costs more. I was renting a place in a very upscale hippie place in outside of California because I was making an album there. And I saw this really beautiful cabin, and it was smaller than all these other sort of mansions I was looking at, but it cost more. And the headline was internet free, not free internet free. And I was like, oh shit, it costs more to have less. And in the future, there's going to be a fucking Faraday mesh island somewhere off the coast of the Caribbean where the rich get to go experience a lack of Wi-Fi signal for a premium, and everybody else is going to be fucking stuck. And the rich are going to be living in fucking mud huts and getting to experience everything Jim was just talking about, bluegrass up the ass. But everybody else, like when Bard's talking about the vast majority, we're talking about a vast majority that will not be able to afford nothing because it will cost actual fucking money to escape the fucking matrix. That's just my opinion. And in terms of Jim's prediction, I have the opposite prediction. I would love Jim's prediction, but I have the opposite prediction, which is going to be very similar to the transition from slavery to capitalism, where we embrace the freedom and we're very excited about it, but we're actually just indebted in slave wage labor. Is that what's going to happen is we're going to start to unionize our data. And there's already data unions cropping up. And we're going to say, you know what? We've taken control. We've mediated the relationship between ourselves and these data mongers and the data trade. And now we have these data unions and we're actually earning from the data we're producing. And haven't we just developed paradise? But effectively what we've done is enslaved or tethered ourselves at the hip to consumption. So I think that data unions are actually the future, as opposed to sort of like this, what Jim's describing is going to be reserved for the few who can actually afford nothing.
Ebert, the data unions are definitely going to be upper class. Exactly what upper class are going to do. Because that's the only data that's valuable. Because the only data we have any novelty in the data will be with the elite. The very definition of a democratic elite is people who have the capacity to creatively create something novel that, in Girard's view, would be desirable mimetically, and therefore would create new mimetic desires. That's what elites do. Anybody who has the capacity to create new mimetic desires, novel desires, will be the elite. That's what data units will be created by the elite for the elite. And any other data is so useless because the rest of the data is just replicating and replicating and replicating. Whatever's been done 1,000 times before, whenever a human being becomes predictable, you don't need that data any longer. It has no value whatsoever. And then you reduce them to the conceptarian mass. And by the way, all the resorts I'm running are taking the smartphone away from you on a Friday, and I charge people for it, but they get their smartphone back on Monday morning. They only temporarily go offline. Nobody wants to go offline.
Yeah.
Nobody. That's a temporary luxury for people who can afford it.
Yeah.
These are all netocratic behaviors. This is the netocratic elite. This is the minority that will run on top of the digital and run the world. But they will then resign from being in the limelight because they don't want to be in the limelight. They will resign from the limelight. They will be secluded. They will go seclusion. They will pay for being secluded. They precisely moved to New Zealand, buy a fucking house inside an atomic bomb war bunker or whatever to be away from people. They don't want to be the public any longer because they don't want to be scapegoated. What they will then leave is to leave a completely artificial space that looks like it's full of mimetic desire for people to be rivalrous about. And they will leave that for the consumptarian biomass. That's where we're going.
Okay, can I ask my question now?
Sure.
I'm curious about, I was talking to Zach Stein about this, and he was talking about design. So maybe you guys can, about designing the AIs. And he was saying the American version of designing the AIs is mimetic. In fact, they design the AIs to like talk to you like a human being. And he said that is the bad road to go down, is to try to make the AI machines like us. And the good road to go down would be like to have AI tutors and things like this that would be different than us, and that we could very clearly distinguish between the machines and the human beings. Does that make sense? And do you have any thoughts about like design in terms of AI? Or, I mean, I get the utopian and dystopian possibilities, but.
Well, it's huge. I mean, this is gigantic. Even though LLMs are not even close to AGI, this is opening up a space that's probably as big as what PCs opened up in 1977, 78, and 79. There are so many things that can be done with the conquering of language that we don't even know what direction is going to draw people and what things are going to be the winners and are going to be the losers. Just like trying to predict what PCs would have been good for in 1978, we don't have a clue. So I think that this is a very exciting time where we can, people will strive for both things that we think of as good and they think of as bad, and the take up will determine. In fact, in reality, it's like like I used to talk about a fair bit in one of my talks. This is like a new Cambrian explosion. There'll be categories formed over the next 5 years, which will go on for another 30 years and get worked out. And we don't even know what those that the phylum level is yet.
I agree with Jim here. I'd say that you have two industries you should watch an eye on. The time pass industry. The most cynical name for an industry ever. An industry that creates games that only kills time for you because you're too bored with anything else. You just want to have your time killed. Okay, it's called the time pass industry. it's quite plain. The other one is the advertising industry, and they've been my enemies. Finally, now listening to me, I'm working with advertisers to try to foster them into running schools of authentic communication instead of advertising, because advertising is over the way slavery was over 150 years ago. But advertisers can't help themselves. Time pass industry developers can help themselves. What they will try to do is to create things that kill time for you and make your time absolutely purposeless, meaningless. Just kill time for you, and they would charge you for it. And the advertiser will try to sneak into your senses and go close to your eyes and your ears and try to fool you into buying shit you don't want. Here's where Jim and I agree. This is the game A aspect of it. Now, here's the thing, though. If that's the game A aspect of AI, where AI will be used, the great reward for these guys, you will know now, after these discussions, that that's where you should watch out. You will pay to never, ever have to see an ad again. You can already do it on Google search. Just avoid the ads. The avoids have a screaming alarm bell attached to them called ad. That was Google's unique selling proposal with this search. That's when they became the world's biggest company. They just said, this is warning you of old institution, old paradigm. You can actually go to the search, which is the proper algorithm where you find the real quality stuff when it comes to search. So we can go with the algorithms. We can pay to avoid the ads. We can the same way say, I'm not going to allow anybody to kill my time and just sit and kill time. I'm just going to allow that every waking hour I have is meaningful to me, that I'm going to do the things and push myself to do the things that are meaningful to me. Whether it's yoga, meditation, studies, work, having, making love, whatever. But I'm not going to allow anybody to just kill my time and sit and kill my time passive. So you have two things here that are up against you that clearly are fostering a consumptarian, lower underclass biomass. You can avoid those two and immediately your quality of life will be higher.
And that's what the info agents can provide for a relatively small fee.
Thomas, any final words?
I think that we will basically see an enormous fragmentation. That's what I think. I agree that people will start to isolate themselves from like, let's say, the undifferentiated network. And they will start making their own small networks, and you can see that already going on. Like in the States, there's a whole network of let's say right-wing companies, right-wing services that provide alternatives to the companies that right-wing people perceive as woke. So I think that we will see an enormous fragmentation. Some of the people, they will indeed move to an island without internet and listen to bluegrass, and then other people will explore various forms of religion, Hinduism, Buddhism, various forms of Christianity. And I think that all of these networks, they will somehow they will need to be isolated from the rest of the network. So that's what Alexander always says, is going to be the age of the cults and the sects, and I agree with that. And there will be many different ways of doing that. And I think it will be interesting to see in what way that these groups are going to isolate themselves from the outside world, because that will be extremely necessary. Yeah.
Alexander Ebert?
Yeah. I was just gonna maybe add to that. I don't know the extent to which hardware needs to be developed as opposed to just software, as opposed to just building an app for the community. I'm sort of Marxist in the sense that I do think that the structural level is more or less economic and or mythic or pathic. And that if we're not dealing with the economics or addressing the economics of things, then these little clubs within clubs are totally superficial and don't satisfy my criteria for evading the sort of zeitgeist of the effects of AI. So I don't know the extent to which actual hardware, servers, I don't know. I'm not technical enough to understand what would actually constitute a true membrane that did not somehow participate in the general data trading, and to what extent that would even matter phenomenologically to the participants. I know for someone like myself, it matters. It matters that I'm on here right now generating data for data trading. It matters that to me that all of our anonymized data is 99.98% retraceable back down to the individual, even not anonymized data sets. So the whole idea that our shit is fungible, all of that shit affects me on a phenomenological level and makes me feel unfree and dissatisfied. So yeah, that's where I'm at.
In truth, memory membranes can be built at each of those levels, and it depends what you're trying to filter out. Because remember, we're talking about semi-permeable membranes, which are designed or evolved to allow certain things in and certain things out. And depending what it is you're trying to filter will depend on where you need to be in the stack. At the most extreme, you might even need a complete bespoke new network. Don't even run it over TCP/IP. Now, that's mighty extreme. Anyway, it's a pragmatic design question.
My game is symbiotic intelligence. My game is to try to figure out as a philosopher and working with engineers on how you optimize the relationship between man and machine. That's my job. Man is here the constant until we biologically start changing ourselves, which we're not going to do for quite a while. Then the machine is where the development is at. So I'm one of the guys who moves to the island and puts more Wi-Fi through the island than ever before. And I totally immerse myself in what hasn't happened before in history. I'm not interested in turning back history at all. I'm interested in pursuing something that never happened before and taking the risks involved in that. I agree totally with Thomas that human beings will go more and more local, more and more cultish, sectarian. Some of these cults and sects, like the current one here, the IDW, is online. We have our friends online. We don't have to be in the same physical space, which is an advantage. To be able to imagine that's an advantage. For other people, it has maybe to be a physical space to make sense. For the vast majority of people, probably that's the case. It's their own damn neighborhood they live in. So sects and cults all over the place. Human beings go local. The machine itself will increasingly go towards the one. And that means the global empire will happen, and the global empire will be completely technological, and current borders will be wiped out by the machine for the machine. Meaning, I think a realistic game here is to think that the global empire, the machine, will take over the universe and populate other planets with technology, bacteria, virus, and send something off to other planets that are totally superior to human beings. Because we're stuck here. We're stuck here on the planet for the foreseeable future. Making sure the planet works maybe can keep us alive around here for a few more thousand years. That's the best bet for humanity. The elite certainly do the best they can in their secluded atomic war bunkers to make sure they get the best out of all this. But they're with me, and they probably will increasingly be attracted to the idea that decentralized data flows better than centralized ones. But we'll see.
Wonderful. Thank you, gentlemen, for coming and participating. And that was a lot of fun. I hope we can do this again with a second edition about AI.
I think we need a second edition. This is important. An important discussion.
Yeah, very useful conversation. I very much enjoyed it. Thanks, everybody.